Okay, now, in terms of the final part of kind of the heft of this presentation, if you do get multiple offers, so if you have that high-class problem of choosing, and even before you choose, I would create a spreadsheet or have on a piece of paper really a list that quantifies the factors that matter to you in this decision-making process. Because it will become overly emotional if you don't rely on key criteria that matter to you. So one example that's listed here, this need not be your list, but it, I think could serve you well. Could entail, for instance, brand name, which is important because it helps build your own personal brand. So if you're choosing between a firm that will lend you credibility afterwards in your career, then that could have value for you. Or if brand name isn't as important to you and you feel confident showcasing your own skill set to people throughout your career without needing to rely on a firm's name, that's okay too. Just rank brand name perhaps lower on your priority list. Culture is always something nebulous that people have a hard time kind of talking about and defining. It ends up being critical in terms of your actual enjoyment of a position, development within a role. You need to know whether you're aligned with the people and the philosophy of the organization that you're joining. It is so critical. And again, as an example, if you are a value investor, for instance, you probably shouldn't join a typical Fidelity kind of analyst group because they tend to focus more on growth-oriented investments. Or if you really, really, really dislike teamwork, if you're just very good at individual work, as bright as you may be, you probably won't thrive at Goldman Sachs just because it is so much of a teamwork-oriented culture where almost every trading group, every committee, every decision is made within groups, and it's something embedded into the fabric of the firm. Opportunity is important. You'll want to know what is your development track. Don't just talk about the role that you're interviewing for when you interview for a position. Ask and do research on what it leads to. So what happens after a few years? If I'm joining an analyst program, is there opportunity for promotion to associate, or must I go to business school? And if you know you're going to business school anyway, that's fine, but at least understand what lies ahead the next few years. Compensation I listed next. I actually think when you're starting out in your career, this is relatively unimportant because you're investing more in your own human capital development as opposed to the financial compensation you receive. So a lot of let me put this in perspective. When I first came out of undergrad, I think my starting salary at Goldman was actually not too different from the salary that I could have been paid working as a public school teacher in New Jersey coming out of school. They were roughly comparable in terms of my base starting salary versus the salary as a New Jersey teacher. If I had just made the decision based on compensation, it would have been silly because I wanted to develop my own human capital as a financial professional, as an analyst, as a trader, and it was so much more valuable, the actual training that I received, as opposed to the compensation from the get-go. So I don't think the compensation should be one of your top factors. Nevertheless, if you're truly being paid a significant discount relative to other people in the industry, you should wonder why that's the case. And it may be because you're getting significantly less opportunity than you would in other similar roles. And so compensation could be a proxy also for opportunity listed above. And then finally, human capital development. I cannot emphasize this enough. It's critical. You should think of the first few years that you're starting within finance as really an extension to your school and your human capital development. Many of these banks and financial firms have training programs. You'll want to ask what type of development you'll receive while you're there. You will want to learn. You'll want to grow. You've paid a lot to go to school, to go to the programs that you go to, and you'll want to make sure that doesn't stop the moment you join a firm and you continue learning. So do some research into that and maybe talk to people who've either worked at some of these firms, do some research online, and figure out to what extent learning is built into the fabric of an organization. Okay, so to kind of bring all this together, we talked about how to prepare for a role within the financial industry and thinking about the various players in the sector. And then we transitioned into strategy, so determining whether or not you should even go into finance and relying on intrinsic motivational factors as a decisive lever to determine whether or not moving into finance is appropriate for you or not. And then we transitioned into some of the factors related to execution. So what to actually do when you're sitting in an interview, both on the analytics side and on the softer side, and tying in your life story into the interview to make sure that your conversation flows and comes across as naturally. And then at the end, we just kind of wrapped up in terms of discussing the high-class problem of choosing between firms and really quantifying what's important to you, ranking them on a spreadsheet, and figuring out when you're deciding among different firms which ones come to the top based on a very rational assessment of the pros and cons of each firm. So with that, I think, Caitlin, we can transition to some Q&A for a few minutes, and we can take it from there.
Thank you, Sean. That was an excellent overview of the industry, and I think a lot of helpful tips for those looking to get their foot in the door. So thank you very much.